Okay, so I'd like to introduce you to the project structure I'm using on all jobs, and it's coming from a template I make with a program called Post Haste, which is rather handy for creating quite complex hierarchies, so you can actually create your own templates and things like that. I think this template actually exists on my Mac, so I'm going to just talk you through my structure here. So I have the main project name here called Monsters. This is the name of the project, and then inside I work in like assets, and everything to do with assets goes in here. So I create a folder called Monster, and this is the name of the actual top level asset. So for example, it's just Monster, and then any data I create from any DCC, digital creation content, anything I work within here. So Houdini file will be there, my nuke stuff will be in there, my painter monster A will be in here, so you can see there's a painter files and all that. So these are all specifically for this asset, so they're all for this particular asset. So the data as well will go in here, so I'll have things from like modeling mainly and textures and things like that. And then the final USD for this asset gets saved here in a versioning system. So I kind of have a detachment here. So even in the main project, I have my assets department, and I can copy and paste this to other projects and everything's there. I then have a thing called ingest, and this is just like a global repository really for me to place everything that might come from other people or other software that needs some kind of cleanup work or is just going to be globally used. So Alembics might be a track from Nuke, audio might be just downloaded free audio, BGOs might be something from a previous Houdini, some documents, FBXs, self-explanatory, they may be a track or just an FBX model, animation, and then HDRIs, there could be some global, so I will have things in here. So I split them into 2K, 4K and 8K, so it's the same map will get resized. I'm only using 2K at the moment, so nothing to worry about too much in there. And things, hopefully the rest is self-explanatory. So these are things that I might use consistently across the projects, and they are just, I chuck everything in there and I will organize it later or just pull it in and use it. So for example, I have these lighting ref balls that I use consistently, and I just have them in the template, which you could use a digital asset as well if you wanted to just drop that down in your scene. So that's the ingest, and then rends, I render to the assets department and to the shots department. We're not working on shots, but I'll briefly explain that I basically specify which program has rendered it, and then I create the shot, the pass name, and do the same with nuke really. So I can kind of quickly go in and find the renders for that shot or the renders for a particular asset. So when I'm working on assets, my first time I render something comes from Houdini, and then it'll go into a comp. So Houdini will render something like so, and then it'll go into a comp like so. And I've just chosen some movies, but I might even use EXRs because sometimes I take those into DaVinci Resolve and I'll grade them as well. But it depends what I'm doing with the asset kind of renders at that point. But I would do the same with my renders in the shoot as well. You might have a DaVinci Resolve eventually, and I'll grade stuff in here. It's just missing that folder at the moment. But we're not doing any shoot integration in this project. So the shoot, again, I just basically put footage in, HDRIs, LUTs, shot reference and tracking data all dedicated to that shot. Again, we're not using it. And then shots is basically where I'd work. So if I'm working on one HIP file for multiple shots, I'd just do it in here. Or if I'm going to break it into shots, I would do the same thing. I would basically choose the program I'm working on per shot and choose the data, a bit like what we had before. So not to overcomplicate it, we're really only going to be jumping in between these three structures for the assets section. I've just made this so it can be scaled up. So that's kind of a quick overview of the asset structure that we'll be dipping in and out of. And in fact, when you receive this file, you may find things missing, and that'll be because the folders were empty, so I've deleted them. So you may end up with a very smaller project file, which I think I'll do a video at the end just showing like the clean and the export file I'm going to give you. So hopefully that's not too overwhelming. It might seem quite large, but it's good to keep structured, I think, and it helps with consistency. It also allows me to archive this and then in 6 months time unarchive this monsters project. So I can unarchive this and I can quickly find my renders, and I can actually quickly find like the asset as well. So I might have monster and critters and whatever different kind of assets in here, and I know that everything in this assets folder is basically in there, and I can copy and paste that and use it again or start modifying on a different project. Or I can quickly go and retrieve the USD file, which is a separate thing altogether now, which would contain everything we need from the textures to the model, and it's kind of a thing that you could use in a different program as well, or in different project. So I started working like that. So that's just a quick overview of the project structure. So most of my SOP file save nodes, my export nodes, are kind of integrated into this just for simplicity and just for consistency, so I know where things are going each time. So we'll talk about that more as we kind of come across those things. So that's the project structure. My backups don't happen within my project structure. They go to a external hard drive into a location. And the reason for that is I often don't like my backups to be integrated into multiple locations. So I just send them all to one place. And if I ever need to go back, then I can find the name of the file and I can kind of restore things. So just in case you're wondering where the backup files are, I'm basically in the build desktop, but I'm working on the stage, and I have my viewer set to context view, so that, and I also have my spreadsheet enabled. And if you use the spreadsheet here instead of the Solaris one, which you can get from somewhere in here, the Solaris scene graph tree and scene graph details are two separate things, which usually for the Solaris kind of base workflows. But if you set it to spreadsheet, it will actually give you both out the box. I also have a content options editor here sometimes that I use. I have a log viewer full of noise and warnings, and I've got my scene graph layer here. So I've kind of just added these. So you can add these like so, and then if you're happy, you can go up and save your current desktop to any kind of name you want. So that's it really. So I'm going to work like that. And the nice thing about the context view is it tries to follow the context that you're traveling in within Houdini. So if I dip into Copernicus or COPS, this viewer should update, and everything else should. But if we need to, we'll change desktops. It's no problem. When I was on my iPad, I took the Sculpt and I exported all the different geometries here. So I'm wondering if we can open this in, it might be a bit like, I wonder if we can open this in G Player or something. It's an OBJ. Does that do? Yeah, so we've got this like kind of monster. Now you're actually viewing, I exported the high-res Sculpt and the quad remeshed version for each one, and some are better quality than the others. So these are like the different monster kind of designs that I've thrown together. So they might look a bit weird because we've got two pieces of geometry in one OBJ. And we're going to make these a USD asset under the monsters USD asset. So here's a slightly different version of that. They get weirder. These are just sculpts that I think they all took about an hour or two, just pulling and pushing around voxels. Did I actually load that one? So yeah, so hopefully you can kind of see where we're going with this. You can see this is kind of a high-res one. It must have exported some kind of surface normal issue or color, but we'll fix it all in Houdini, don't worry. So this one again, and this one, there's some issues. So obviously when we export these, sometimes they have issues. And again, this is the high res and low res and high res and low res. So they're just like really silly little sculpts that we just want a load of monsters in one USD asset, I guess. And actually I haven't seen this problem before, so I would probably just fix this in Nomad Sculpt if I can, but if not, I will just fix this in Houdini. So, but that's the whole point of like sculpting. That, you know, they're not really necessarily going to go anywhere. It's just something to play with, I guess, but we need to bring it in first and make sure it's all clean. So if you usually had a model like a good modeler, they would give you a retopologized version and good UVs. So we're on the stage and I have a little asset here, which is from a template I made a while back. I made some kind of starter templates where I could just drop down digital asset. I would extract its content and would have a little setup in here that which I've built, but I'm going to go through it and show you. So inside this subnet, it's not a digital asset. If we go inside this asset, and I've named this monster because I'm going to actually use this name to kind of trigger a couple of auto renames for things, and I'm actually saving in my monsters, the project's called monsters, and I'm saving it under the monster asset. So I'm going to kind of just work here for this. So jumping in, we are greeted with this. So we're going to just go through it in sections because it's not too complicated. But the whole purpose of this is to be able to copy and paste and get a lot of things for free and then just automate the rendering process. So from the top, we have this kind of Solaris-based LOP network here for authoring USD geometry variants. In this case, the first geometry variant is called A, and then we can apply subdivision settings and dicing now to basically different parts of things within this USD, which we are going to talk about how we get to this point. So this is nice for like testing out different displacement settings and different subdivision settings for different bits in your model. These models are usually this one's got no bits to it. It's literally just a surface skin. And then we're basically going to create a material library and we're going to basically apply the material to this and create a material variant. And we're going to have quite a lot of these eventually. So I'll just step through it. Then eventually we're going to do some look dev, some turntables, put it in a turntable scene, render this with a load of passes, and we're going to set up some high res, low res renders, and we're going to switch between different environment maps as well. And we're going to have this essentially spin round like so, and then the environment's going to spin round like so as well. So the way this is going to work, it's going to let me dirty, and we're going to be able to switch between two different environments, or as many as we need, and it will render from 1000 to 1000. It's a very short frame range, but it's going to spin around like so. And we can now have the ability to change the length of this turntable if you have enough render power. And this is going to auto update because we've got this stage frame range drives the playback range. So now it's going to spin round and loop between that range, and then this is going to spin round. So it's always going to loop like so, no matter how many frames I make this. So depending on how much you need to see, you can kind of do this. So, but what I do is when I'm just testing, I just basically make it really fast and I render without motion blur. So I can kind of get a quick snapshot of the light rigs for each one like so. So we don't worry about this overview is very quick, but we're just going to quickly look at bringing in the model. So again, I'm in Solaris, and the component geometry will take you inside of a SOPs area, a geometry area, and you can see this color here is like a green like so. So just bear that in mind. I'm going to link this view back because it should actually be completely in SOPs. And if you see this here, you can press Y and you can hide it. So this is going to allow you to see, you know, outside of this network. So if you had other things going off, you'll be able to see through into the next context, which would be our stage context here. So what I do is I import the original Sculpt, and it's quite a heavy file. And I will quickly just have a look at this, and I can see straight away I've added the geometry and the Sculpt and the quad remesh version in here, like so. So I'll analyze what's coming in, and I will just basically strip away stuff that I'm not really interested in at this moment in time. So, and I like to try to take control of everything. So I only keep the normals and the path attribute and the current UVs, which the UVs are only on the low res version. So I'll just reset the normals, and then I'll use a split node here, and I will just grab the path, and I will just say split on the left hand side the monster A high skin, which is what I called this in Nomad Sculpt. So you will see here it splits the high res sculpt, and then I'm going to give it a new name called skin, which will be a primitive attribute, like so. And this path, it's not needed. We're going to create our own path again in Solaris, so we're going to keep the name though, and we're going to use the path. Well, we're going to discuss the path in a sec when we start baking out textures. And then on the right hand side, we create a null. We've got the thing that we're going to render, and this should contain the UVs and everything. So when I made this a while back, the model wasn't great and the UVs weren't great. You can see it's a sculpt, so I could just go with it because it's still got problems here, and you can see the sculpt version and the render version. You can see there's a difference, and I was trying my best to kind of fix that, but I just gave up because it was just a concept sculpt for this moment in time. So this also has UVs, and you can actually go and view the back faces and the overlaps as well using some of these little checkboxes here. So you can see there's quite a lot of overlaps in the UVs, which could be a problem if a texture artist had given me, or a model had given me that. I'd be asking them to fix it because it's not good. Also, these UVs are, well, they're not terrible, I guess, but they're not great. I did them on the iPad, so it was like, yep, there's problems with it, obviously. So I was going to go back and fix the sculpt, and I thought, well, it's a concept, I'm just going to keep moving forward with it. So what I did is I took this into here, and this is quite a slow process, and I took it through a remeshing and a re-UVing process. So I just took the inside of here, I grabbed the sculpt. So if you go up, this is actually grabbing this sculpt here into this little network. And then I just did basically a VDB from polygons and a bit of a smooth, and then converted it and decimated it. So I essentially just did what you'd normally do in a sculpting app. So this is going to churn away a little bit on the old processor, but it's going to just clean up a few bad bits of geometry, because essentially it's going to it's like dynameshing it in ZBrush or something, I guess. So I'm just doing this. It's totally optional. If your model came in and your high-res sculpt was great and your retopology model was great and the UVs are great, we could just basically bypass that. But the chances are, if you're kind of loosely sculpting something, you might not see a few things, or you just might have to fix a few things up. And the nice thing about this part here is, because you're entering a VDB world, you've got the whole tool set of VDBs to kind of add all sorts of crazy patterns and stuff in there as well. So you can actually use VDBs to assist you getting a geometry variant as well. So as you can see, this is the new version, and it's going to be a little bit cleaner around the edges and stuff. You won't have any weird geometry coming in. So before we had a few bits and bobs which they just looked a little bit odd in certain areas. Can't quite remember where, but then the new version is basically going to make sure that's all smooth. I will then just save that out. So I've just got a location where I save things to. So you see this is referencing somewhere. Again, that's just my crazy pipeline, but I'll explain it to you. This is going to save this out under the project monsters, assets, monster, and then data, and it's going to be part of the modeling department, and it's geometry. So it's going to be monster A, and then it's going to save it out in skin remesh here like that. So it's kind of unique data. So if this project gets quite large, it's just a very structured place for this data to go. And that's been automated because this is linked to a control somewhere, which is just automatically sending this out based on the department and the asset name, which is derived from up here and stuff. So just the way of working, really. You don't have to do that. So the whole point of this is just to re-sculpt or remesh this, and then I'm going to use quad remesher to get a better topology on this, and we're going to use a bit of procedural kind of painting methods to kind of distribute the polygons where I need them, and then we'll do an auto UV. Again, it's not going to be great because retopology and UVing does take time, and I wanted to not disrespect the people who do that because they do a great job, but I just wanted to cut out that moment when I'm kind of just playing with Vellum or just testing something out. So if this model becomes something I really liked, I would actually take the time to retopologize and re-UV this professionally. But because it's part of a series of sculpts, like speed sculpts, I'm not really that precious about it. We're just going to save this down. So it's now in here, so we don't have to process all of that ever again. And this path here, as you've just seen on disk, is going into a nice neat location, and that's derived from a controller somewhere, probably a bright green controller from somewhere outside of this network. So it's somewhere. Let's see if I can find it for you. It's down here, so it's just this little digital asset, which is just I choose the department because I am technically working as a modeling department right now, and the asset name is this expression, which will grab the monster, and then the geometry variant, which is going to grab this, which is all named above, so it's kind of tidy that way. And then this is just a predefined location where things go, so it's just referencing the name several times and just concatenating a string. So that's pretty much what is doing all of the work here. So I don't have to worry where I put things anymore. So let's go back inside this digital this subnet here. It's just a way of organizing yourself. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I noticed, and I couldn't quite figure out why, but every time I do a retopology, I couldn't quite get the edges to meet the original scoped shape here. So in an attempt to do that, I tried to remesh this with more resolution here. So I grouped this with a bounding box like so, and then I just added a color here. Now this is a color that quad remesher will use later on to reduce the amount of polygons that is created. And then I'm going to calculate a thickness attribute here, which I'm not going to output the color, I'm just going to output the normalized thickness value. So this might all seem a little bit long-winded, but it's actually, once it's all set up, it's quite quick to do. And this is my emergency kind of place to go if I need something quickly. But there's the thickness attribute here. So I'm just basically viewing that now in the viewport. And then I'm going to blur that thickness attribute so you can see it's getting a slight, oops, it's getting a slight blur to it. And then I'm going to attribute adjust this. So I'm going to turn that viewer off. And I'm going to now take the existing color and I'm just going to multiply this value on here. So red and these colors here will load into this quad remesher. And because I've got this use vertex colors, the quad remesher will give me like a certain density of red on the red and a certain density on the cyan based on this. So this is like a multiplier of that. So it's going to try and give me 5,000 quads. So here's one I did earlier, and it's kind of not bad. It's given me quite good topology, and then I would just delete the attributes, clean up, and I've kind of got an emergency way of retopologizing stuff. Now quad remesher it's in the labs toolkit, but you have to buy a license for it. So you have to go on their website and pay for it, and it's like a one-off purchase. I have this for about 4 or 5 years, and I know there is now the quad, is it the remesh or whatever they call it, quad remesh, but it's in beta, and I haven't had time to look at it too much, but it never seems to give the results I kind of want. But maybe I'll revisit this and have a look, because this is kind of like out the box, but then there's a lot of things you can do to try and improve that, but I just lost my patience with it. And when you've got a tool that works, you just use it. So if it's not in beta, I might give it a go. So this is basically a retopoed version of the remeshed version as well. So I've kind of gone in and just created a new bit of geometry. And then I don't know if you notice, but the original Sculpt and the retopo, in fact, let me do it the other way. Let me just click this and mirror this. You can see the edges don't really kind of meet up, and that's going to be a bit of a problem because it will try and put them out in a displacement map, but it's going to be a bit annoying for CFX when this thing might be hitting some glass and your simulation mesh is made from this, but the displacement is kind of pushing out that much. So ideally you'd want the retopology to go at least up to there and have minimal deviation, but I have struggled with that. So I'm going to look back into this, but remember that. So what I decided to do is calculate the thickness again, do an attribute blur of the thickness, and put the thickness into a color map. And then I'm just creating a group like this using the group expression, and it's just going to grab I made a little slider here, thickness threshold and Z limit. So it's basically going to say get this at thickness and basically give me a range that sits within the thickness threshold. And then it's also going to remove stuff from the back. So essentially I don't get points where I don't need them like that. So it was a nice way of not having to do group combinations and stuff. So I want to use these endpoints maybe to reproject or ray them back into position and use a smooth with the inverse of the reproject. So everything remains the same apart from the tips get a bit of a smooth, and they also get a bit of a reprojection in place, which it's not ideal. And then I go ahead and clean everything up again. So I essentially come out of this with a new model with just normals in a position, but I've got a little bit of a procedural way of trying to get slightly better. And this model's symmetrical, thankfully, so I just used symmetry when I remeshed it. And this because the Sculpt is also obviously symmetrical. So if we look back at the original Sculpt now, it's still not perfect. So it's something that I'm going to have to look into. I'm not really into modeling and stuff, so I'm going to revisit this and try and get more polygons in there and stuff. But I mean, I tried quite a while, and I actually couldn't seem to get the polygons to kind of pull out to the edge. But it might just mean there needs to be more resolution in here, and that's why I kind of created this remeshing kind of distribution map, because this will allow more polygons. So the idea is that I can bring in the density procedurally, and this is a really handy little trick for like remeshing your sim meshes and stuff later on as well. But I'm not going to change it, I'm just going to go with it. So I'm just going to output here, and this is basically what that is. So this switch here is basically saying, oh yeah, I did need to fix this. So that was the original and that's the new one. So, you know, it's the new one actually shrinks in even more. So I might just have a go, but ideally you would have this already done for you. So to be honest, this part you would be given maybe two files, one for the Sculpt and one for the retopo. But because I was just throwing one OBJ off my iPad onto my hard drive, I combined them together, and then I've just had to split them, and that's what I did. So the thing here is we've got a single mesh, and you know, for Vellum that would be fine. We could, you know, you could kind of create a tetrahedral mesh and have that bouncing around, and it would try to retain the volume and stuff. But if you wanted to do stuff later on where we choose to kind of make this explode and things, it would be nice to have some insides to it as well, and have some textures and stuff like that, and some geometry for that. So I came up with a way of just using a VDB from polygons here. So to avoid this faceting when you do that, you could just subdivide this one time here. So it subdivides the mesh, and then it does a VDB from polygons, and then we can VDB reshape this. Do I think it's a couple of VDB operations to kind of smooth this out, and we want to kind of create an inside. So I'll keep going with this like so, and you'll see it starts to get a little bit weird here, but that's okay. And then we're going to create a VDB smooth again. That's perfect, what I want. Then we'll do a VDB reshape, and I'm going to convert this, and that's going to be my inside cavity. So if I want, I can now group this in procedural ways and soft transform this in, just because I might want to see how the original geometry. So I'm creating a thickness to this. We could say it's like a pocket of fat or something. So we're creating some fat, and this will also be quite nice because it's going to allow subsurface to kind of come through as well. So you'll get like a fat pocket and subsurface, and this bit in the middle could just be a load of fluid or blood, or it could be a network of guts or something. I don't know yet. So again, I kind of did this. So I didn't use the fix in this case because it did actually come out fine. So basically you have this kind of negative thing. So this will all be very fatty, and then this will have some kind of internal structure to it, and there'll be a thickness to the skin. So we can use that in CFX or not, or effects later on. So to complete this, then I'd go back into VDBs from Polygon, and I'd just get a remesh of this. It's probably a little bit on the high side, but what we're essentially going to do is retopo this one more time, try to get some quads from this. So this workflow, it was a bit delayed at the beginning because the model was kind of a mess, and you might not get all the names correct from whoever's giving it you. But if you want to make your life a little bit easier, if they name the file something sensible, and then they name the actual geometry inside something sensible that you've agreed on, you have minimal work there as well. So the quad remesh comes in, and it's a little bit high. So I'll revisit this later on and just make this evenly spaced, and lighter, but for now that's fine. So I'm going to auto UV this. Now, again, this sometimes doesn't work very well, but you notice I've moved this to the UDIM of 1002, and that's because the newly created other side is here, like so. And then if we get any UV overlaps in here, again, I'm very, very quickly, it doesn't seem like there are any because it would be glowing red. You can do a UV remove and it will try to remove any overlaps. It seems like it's okay. Now, this part is just all like, you just plug in a new model and you'd just get like the inside and the outside like so. So I'm going to do an attribute cleanup on this. We'll call it the fascia. So we're just keeping the normals, the color, the name, the UVs, and we somehow have got UV seams. So that's a group, isn't it? So we'll catch that later on, I guess. Maybe we should grab that. Just make sure that this doesn't grab that as well. Yeah, it's okay. So I did a smooth, I don't know why, but then I did a calculate thickness again. And you'll need normals to do this. So this is like, it should shut that up. I'm going to calculate the thickness here, and then I'm going to do another group expression to grab this. I'm going to do a soft peak and just peek in this ever so slightly. But I'm using the curvature here to formulate an attribute, and then I'm doing the same thing where I grab it and I use that as a group to not peek in. So that's pretty much so I don't affect this kind of stuff, because you start to squash things in, they'll start to invert on themselves, and you could see that mesh is already a bit flaky. But we've got like a procedural way of grabbing this fascia. So I'll just save that out, and then we've got the skin as well. So if your model was actually really clean and tidy and everything, then your model would have just come in here and your fascia would have come in here. And I'm doing a booleans operation set to subtract A from B. So what's going to happen now is I've got like skin and an inside thickness for this geometry. So just bear that in mind, and I'll just save this out. So we can now grab both of these and bring them into here for a quick look. And then I'm going to color the skin and the inside, and the inside group has come from the Boolean operation that creates like an inside and an outside group, which is self-explanatory in a minute. And so we've got the fascia. So I'm going to color them all, and then I'm going to clip and look inside. So essentially you get like this. You get your skin, which is the red, and the green, which is part of the same model. And then you've got a separate model, which is the blue, which is the fascia, and that could be a muscle for CFX, or it could be containing fluid or whatever. So we've got some kind of starting point to have some fun with. And that's pretty much what I've got here before now that's the model is finished, and I can send this straight out to Solaris. So the component builder ships with these three outputs that should be there. So I can bring in basically the fascia and the skin, and then do a poly reduce here, and this will become the proxy purpose. So this is the render, and this is what will render, and this is what's going to be in the viewport. So if we go up, it doesn't matter where you are now, as long as you go up here like that, you'll see that when we're right to the top, we're looking at the proxy here. So we've got a model that we can use, and it's got UVs, and we can start to think about textures. So I have some textures on disk, so my textures all live on disk in a set location. So I have like in the monster project, under the asset, under the monster asset, which is this fella here. And then data, I've published a EXR folder. So we're going to delete that. It might not let me because I've just tried to render with this. The rats are being used. So I'll quickly just show you in a sec. I'm going to have to kill Houdini to kill that folder, and then we'll just start from scratch. Okay, we're back. So if you remember, we have this text data textures. So that's where I'm going to publish on this monsters project under assets. For this asset, I'm going to put my textures, all my textures for this geometry variant and material variant are all going to go in here. So I'm going to jump over to Substance Painter in a second, but before we do, I'm just going to prepare something here. Yeah, so I need to tidy all this up. But basically, this goes into the USD, into Houdini, and then I'm also sending this up into Painter. So what I'm having to do here is grab this fascia and grab this model, and then I'm going to remove the inside. Okay, so that's removing the skin inside. So, and this is going to be my object. It's going to have it's going to get imported into Substance Painter, and it's going to have this surface and the fascia as two separate meshes. So I'm going to clean up any unneeded groups, and I'm going to set a path here like so, and it's going to take the name and it's going to give a path and a shop material path for everything in there, so the skin and the fascia, and that will allow Substance Painter to bring them in. Quickly jump over into Substance Painter. It'll allow to bring them in as like separate objects for you to paint. So if I go into the focus mode, you should see we've got two smart materials just quickly thrown on here, and I can kind of see that. But before you can use these like smart materials, you need to bake out the bake maps, all the kind of different types of maps that this would use. So you'd have like all these different types of maps and things. This is going to drive a lot of the smart materials in Substance Painter. So you might just have a texture pack from your texture artist, but I like to just throw textures on in Substance Painter. It's much quicker and easier than Copernicus at the moment, although Copernicus could be used to do this as well. But because you can save very quickly your favorite creature skins and stuff, you can throw them on and have them as triplanar and stuff like that. So you can kind of get kind of gross pimply skin. This is not looking great at the moment, but it's literally 10 minutes thrown on from a previous shader. So I've put on like an inside as well, so you can see you've got like a grossness to it. So if this is revealed, this will have something in it. Now you could do all this in Copernicus as well if you wanted to do. So I'm going to talk about all this because in order to get those maps, you have to bake these out. And in order to bake them out, you need to have a few things set. So you need your mesh to paint on, or meshes to paint on, which are these two meshes. So we've removed the inside thickness of the skin, so we've just got the shell, and then we've brought in the fascia as a separate mesh. So that's going to be a very clean named set of geometry. That's kind of just going into the Painter world. So I'm going to send that to Painter. And then you can set up cages, which I didn't do, so we can ignore that, but you can set up custom bake cages around to kind of accommodate for funny shapes and stuff, but keeping it simple. I brought in the high res mesh here, and it's just the sculpt, the new sculpt. And then just as a Brucey bonus or an extra thing, I put in an ambient occlusion, which is really, really slow. And I colored it basically. So I used the labs dirt buildup, labs physical ambient occlusion. I didn't even use this, to be honest. It was just a test to see whether I could get this working. But I took the the attribute and I remapped it into color, and I promoted it as a vertex color, and it's now embedded as a vertex color. So this will become maybe a usable ID, some kind of workflow. So there it is. So that's on the low res geometry as well. So where's the shortcut for wireframing this? Would it be in display rather than, is it there? So that, yeah, that's we're looking at the low res thing here anyway. But all those details from the high res mesh get baked onto this when you go into the bake menu here, and it starts to kind of do stuff like this. So what you would do is you could then set your paths again here exactly the same, so you end up with the same name and the same path, and Substance Painter can use that. So we can export the high and the low in a separate stream, and I save these a bit like before. I save them with the Painter file on disk. So in the monsters projects under monster, under DCC, under Painter, I go in Monster A and I just throw my 3D scene, my paint scenes in there, and you can see my FBX in there. It's a little bit messy, but it's basically easy enough to understand, I think, for now. So you've got the high and you've got the low and the optional cage FBX. So the FBX settings are like so. They're the same. You export those. The problem is when you export them, they're in the same spot. So when you try to bake, you get some weird artifacts. So what you can do is add a transform here to move one mesh over to one side, like so. And then make sure that this mesh gets the same transform. So what you're getting here is you're getting the skin moved over, low res skin is moved over, and then the skin of the high res is being moved over. But we didn't have anything for the fascia in the scope, so I just merged in the low res fascia from the end of our chain, like back down here, and I just moved that in to here so I could get both the names, equivalent names, so Painter wouldn't freak out, and I could just do all that in one file. So essentially what we get is we get a scene, like a high res scene to bake, and then a low res scene to bake as well. So when they go into the baker and it bakes, this would work. So the baking, I'm doing basically the cage. I'm pointing to the high res model, which is two of them kind of aligned opposite like this, and that's it. So then you would configure the ID to be vertex, and then everything else you can just set up. It's not a Painter tutorial anyway. Normally you'd be given the textures. So you would bake this out, and then when you return to your painting, you'll notice I would then, by the way, these would be kind of in different positions. So this would be here and this one would be over here. So I would then just go back to Houdini and uncheck these to uncheck. Oops, I came back out of the node. I would come out and I would uncheck these two bits here and then just re-enable the save. So I would only just save out just the Painter low back in the origin like that. So you would end up with Painter maps all baked out, as you can see, and they can contribute to your smart material. So you can get them both. You click on the isolate, you can get them both to work on the smart materials. So you could spend, you know, days on this. I didn't, as you can tell. I've thrown some color on here and I've thrown some color on here, and it's just one mesh. So, and you can see the whole like topology issue of like the mesh sometimes not baking. So there is still a lot of kind of finesse to do, but for like a quick like pipeliney workflow, feel like this was quite nice because it kind of all just sits in the SOP level here, and this is copy and paste this if you want into a new model, which we'll do in a second. So without getting totally sidetracked, in terms of the materials, I have a template material that I load in, which is basically predefined from a template, and then I will copy and paste that and start doing look dev on things. But before all of that, I just get the very basic MaterialX standard shader here and set it to like a neutral grey and a rough. It's basically the same settings of the grey ball, and I plug that. You can click on these three and you can grab the base color. You can click out here, sorry, and it will replace this. This is your shader now, and I've plugged in the geometry normals, and we'll talk about this in a second in here. And I've just plugged in the displacement, and we get a very quick setup. So that would be like a really basic grey render or clay render or something. So we should be able to render this, but if we render this right now, nothing will happen because there are no textures published. So in order to do that, you would set up an exporter, and the way I'm working on this, once I'm happy with this creature or whatever it is here, I would go file, I'd save the project, and the name of the project is quite important, and this is a bit like you know, but I'm calling it the asset and the geometry variant and the material variant here, and then I'm gonna rely on this name for my exporter. So what you could do is have a working folder and call it monster a pink underscore 01001, and then you can do as many versions, and then you can save the main file to like a publish location, and then just go to file, export textures, and then I've got a template I've created here suitable for what I need, and it's just basically got base color, roughness. Metallic isn't really needed in this, but I'll just not use it. Emissive, normals, ambient occlusion, thickness, scattering, I don't often use it. Curvature and height, well, scattering, you can export scattering weight and scattering color and anything else you want, so you can configure this to be what you like. But you'll notice this is going to a dollar project, base color dollar project. So this dollar project is basically going to name this monster underscore a pink 01. So that's going to be the name of the file. In fact, this will resolve this, so you'll have two texture sets for each UDIM tile. So I can apply this onto the models under one material network shader in Houdini. So I thought that was kind of interesting because it's kind of keeping it tidy and easy. So if I export this now, and if we go and have a look back in our structure here to the monster and the data and the textures, right, I don't have anything. But if as soon as I export my work, I'll get an EXR folder and then a folder named after the asset, the geometry variant and the material variant. So I've got these folders all very nicely named, so the texture UDIMs are actually neatly named, and it's really important, this, I think, to have all the names in a good place, and they're EXRs. So that's one way of getting out something. So if I wanted to then save as a monster pink 2 for it here, I'll just save over the old one. Hopefully I'm not too precious about it. And then I went ahead and did some changes to this. So you can go ahead now and just change all the attributes on here, or paint a very specific color to this file and export again. So maybe just wait for my computer to wake up. If I click on isolate, I could, on this fascia, for example, I'm not using this layer, and I'm not using those layers actually, but I could take these spots and go to the properties and just add more of them and just do a randomization. And same with the veins, you know, it's very much you can just randomize stuff and then just change things a little bit here and there. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it might just be enough to give a randomness to it. And again, it's totally up to you what you want to do. Let's have a look. It's going to be very unnoticeable, to be quite honest, but maybe you can see I've used the presets, so I've still got the names of the old map. So the main one that you'd be interested in tweaking though would probably be like this guy. So you'd probably go in and do the same thing and change, and maybe have a lot of them. Maybe you have one with a lot of surface imperfections and yellow cells. We could randomize this a little bit more, and then we can start to change the overall colors a little bit more to get a kind of a slightly different color and a different variant. So again, not exactly a very good demonstration of it's not a very good demonstration of Substance Painter here, but we can go ahead and just randomize a lot of stuff. And because this is a material variant, it doesn't have to be totally all that different. You know, it doesn't have to be crazily different. It can just be, you might have a few of them in the scenes. You might just want them to look a little bit different, and the veins might be enough. So I don't know if he looks all that different. Where's the dominant color? The pink cells. Yeah, I think that's okay. So what I'll do is I'll just save this, and you would spend time doing this back and forth, I guess, with texturing. But let's say the textures were done. You can go File, Export Textures. I don't have to do anything now. I can just export again, and I get another pack. I go up, and I get another pack of EXRs in here, like so. So we'll quickly just save as, and we'll grab the third one, and we'll make one that's probably a little bit. I'll not bother with the fascia because I don't think we're really going to see it until we get into the CFX side of things. But the nice thing about that, CFX could do what they want to that mesh. It could be exploding, and then we might look at the final project and go, yeah, we need more variation on that inside, and CFX don't have to do anything. We can just author new textures and they will pick it up in the final CFX because we're going to work in a USD workflow. So that's going to be quite interesting, I think. So what I'll do is I'll just fast forward this bit where I'll just randomize another texture set here. And we'll just create 3 material variants for this really quickly. So we've got another variant of this guy with the the fascia. This is like the fascia underneath as well, which, you know, for what it's worth, we could just add a couple of randomizations. Not sure we're going to see it just yet. What else could we... only I could remember everything to do with Substance Painter right now. Too busy trying to remember Houdini stuff. That might be interesting. Oh yeah, that's different. All right, so we've got, again, the fascia, and then we've got the surface skin. Now, if you remember, our surface skin did actually have thickness, but we're going to just use the same texture map because it's going to have the same UVs basically, and it's just going to catch that on the UDIM tile, and it should be okay. So we've got this. I'm going to File, Export, Textures, Export, and then we've got 3 texture packs, all nicely named, but they're EXRs. So we could say now that we are we are done with Substance Painter. Again, sorry, it's not a Substance Painter tutorial, but your texture artist could say to you, yeah, I've given you 3 texture packs and you've agreed on this naming convention, and here it is. So here you are in Houdini again, and we brought in the model and we did some exports that we've chosen to texture ourselves. So we've kind of gone down this road to kind of get this texturing setup workflow done, and we've done a bit of making new models and things like that. So from one Sculpt, we've kind of gone a little bit off here and we've done a little bit of work, but this is a template that can be bypassed or reused quite quickly just by copying and pasting it from one component into another and importing a new model. Before we do that, we need to assign the textures to this. So this is where the material library comes. So I've created a material library and called it MaterialX-based. So it's for this geometry variant exclusively in this stream. And then I've assigned it to the fascia and the skin here, like so. So that's actually going to catch the proxy as well. So it's going to try and show me in the viewport the best it can as well. But this right now, this material is still pointing to the grey material and it's still pointing to the EXRs. So when we start the project, you probably only have EXRs. So if you render this now, oh, let me expand, let me Control B just to go through a few things. This node here, I'm using Python to grab this name, and then I'm using Python to grab this name. So you could literally have concatenated, it doesn't matter, but it's just going to work. And this is the path I'm going to put inside of all of my nodes that are going to have textures in. So there's some stuff I'm not actually using from the template, so they can go. And this is the bit where you would go back and forth between Painter and you don't even have to be very precious about automating it. You could just put the path directly in right now and go and find it. But what I've done is, because I know that I have 2 types of maps, I have the color maps, which are going to be ACES CG. So I've kind of created them to be green. Then I've got the utility maps, things like metallic, roughness, specular, and I just color them blue, and they're going to be basically floats and a raw file. So that's just one way of identifying them visually for me, apart from the normal, which is always a vector 3. I'm not sure what color space the normal should be in, so I just left it. It seems to work fine. The height is also going to be float, and this little string at the top here is just something I put in. I just went into the menu, created a string and added that in, and I'm just kind of like tagging the pass like in here. So it's the same node, but I'm just tagging this. I'm going to use that to identify string in here. So this huge string here is basically going to my assets location, and then it's going to go and find that texture. So it's basically referencing the EXRs, the material name, the texture type here, and then the UDIMs and the extension. So it's a kind of a concatenation of this, and all I have to do now is copy and paste this node and name it to be the Substance Painter pass on disk. So for example, all I have to do is go, okay, so I'm looking for my base color, so that's it. I just put it there like so, and it'll automatically find the EXRs. So you can get quick assignments just by having a little folder structure, see, and everything like that. So these things are redundant, but we're going to talk about those in some other tutorial. But these you can actually render out into the renderer different passes, like a bit like what you see in Substance Painter, where you have the normal pass, the metallic pass, and the baked map passes. You can actually put those into Houdini's renderer and view them as an AOV as well if you wanted to. I'm not going to use them in this case. So we've got a very simple network that is a mess. I do apologize. And they're plugged into the main shader. But all I've done to start with to get me going is I might just load up Substance Painter and bake out the maps and just pull in the normal and the height and just mess around with that and plug that into a grey shader for now. And that would render. So this is important, the name of this. I've named this after the thing it should be going to, basically, the monster asset, the geometry variant and the material variant. So basically this will auto assign. So the material path is going to, again, the reason I'm automating this is when I copy paste this, it will just automatically update and will not have to do any work. So this might all seem a little bit long-winded, but we can quickly scale up this template really quickly. So the primitives are always going to be called asset geo. They're always going to be an asset geo. I'm going to assign to these unless we need to change that. We can add strings and collections in there. The material path, well, my material is going to live in assets material, which is defined up here. And the name of the material, I'm nicking this name, which just happens to be the same as that. So it's procedural. So as long as this is named after the material it's going to get assigned to, then it should be fine and it should work. So if we render this now, Houdini's going to convert the EXRs to RAT files, but we can just do it ourselves. So I'm just going to convert those textures on disk here using this system here. So I'm going to kind of quickly dirty all and generate the static work items. That seems, oh, that's about right. Yep. So we've got quite a lot of textures on disk, haven't we? So we've got 3 texture packs which are containing several passes which contain several UDIMs. So I'm just going to grab them in one swift network here. And I'm just basically going to go and point to the place that they live in my data structure. And I'm just going to basically use some strings to swap between the EXRs and the RAT files. So essentially what we'll be getting, if you middle click, you can get information here, but you can't read it all. So if you right click and you go work item info, and then you expand it, and then you remove it, and then you middle click, you can read it. So it's going to get these files and then switch it to RAT. So you're going to get a new RAT folder, and then the extensions are going to be swapped to RAT as well. So I'm going to go ahead and dirty all and generate and cook and save. And Houdini's going to do this one time for me rather than it trying to do these at render time, which if you rendered these EXRs as they were right now, Houdini would convert those EXRs and it would place those EXRs inside of particularly the normal and the height folder because they're the ones that are plugged into this material. So this material currently is only activating 2 passes. It's activating the height and the normal. So if we were to hit render now, that would get converted. It'd take a few seconds, but it would convert that into a normal, and you would see 2 RAT files in here. And that's perfectly fine, and Houdini would automatically just use those. It would switch automatically for you as well. But I quite like to convert my RATs here. So that's what this top network's doing. So it's going through and it's just creating a copy, and everything now is going to get converted to RATs, which is a more efficient way for Houdini to work. But before I can do any of that, I just need to toggle this to RAT, and then every single one of these is linked, and this would become a RAT extension. So if you look in here now, it finds the RAT folders instead. So it's going to the RAT folder there. So there's no conversion happening now at render time. So I can press up and then hopefully I can just hit render. Okay, we have Karma XPU running. And as you can see, we're looking at it here. We can look at it right on the node here. And we're just exporting all of the textures now. So we have the EXRs from Painter, and then I've converted them to rats. So we've got 3 material variants, and we've got one here that we're just looking at, and we're just looking at the clay for now. And we could literally just work like this, but I'm going to put the materials in and we'll take a look. So in my material library, and what I'll do is I'll pin this viewer so it just keeps kind of consistently open even if I dive into this. And I've got this material here, and I'm going to switch out now to this here, so you can get all that kind of subsurfacing stuff. So the shade is pretty simple. I'm using the roughness map, and I'm just basically, I'm not doing anything with it. I'm just bringing it in. I'm using the color map in the color from Painter, and then I'm just using the curvature and multiplying that in to do some subsurface color, a bit of variation in there. So this is where you would spend your days doing your look dev. So we're plugging in the normal, and then the height. So the height is the height map coming in like so, and it's remapped so it works correctly from Painter to Karma. And then normally you just have the displacement scale here, but I'm multiplying this against a black and white attribute called region. So region is basically taking this skin geometry, and in fact I'll quickly show you. Let me quickly press Shift R to stop the render and press U to come back up, and then back down here. I'm creating an attribute called region, and I'm taking the booleans groups like so and just creating an attribute which is just a black and white attribute, so I can multiply the displacement. So essentially what's going to happen if we quickly jump into SOPS -1 W, we do a clip. Let's clip this guy, and you can see this is one classed as one named piece of geometry in Solaris. So we're going to get this like negative fat here. But the region, I want the displacement only to be on the surface and not on the inside. So I'm not sure if I fixed this up in Substance Painter, so I just made sure that there's no displacement here. So basically the attribute region looks like this. So off and on, basically 0 and 1, just to make sure that that is kind of doing its thing. I press U to go back up. So right now we are viewing this with no lights. We're just kind of navigating in this, and no render settings. The render settings, when you don't have render settings node, Karma uses Houdini uses Karma's render setting from like a global kind of setting. If you press D in the viewport, you can get them from here. So you can quickly configure this up to get what you need as well. So just take a look at that. It's all in there. And I tend to just very briefly stay in this area. So what I'm going to do now is just pop that into a geo variant, and that's going to make sure that my geometry variant here is basically being named correctly. So it's going to make this a geometry variant of A. We've only got one model at the moment, so that's probably okay. And that's because here it's using a $OS. If I middle click, it's returning A. So if you want to write something custom there as opposed to what's in here, you can. And same for the material. Here it's saying variant name, and I'm basically doing this. So I'm just saying Pinko 1. So I'm just not wanting to use the word monster A, Pinko 1. But if I do a Pinko 2, Pinko 3, Pinko 4, and then I copy this all the way across, it would say monster be pink 01. So it would be unique, but I just don't want that to be in my geometry. I just don't want that to be my name. So what I mean by that, if I can get this, the geometry variant is just, it's here like so. It's just saying that. So if I come back down to the final asset here, you've got the GeoA and pink 01, and that's all we have right now. So that's a building block to start with. So I've added a camera in here, and I put the camera in here so I can actually see roughly what I need, and I can position this. And I basically just have a little setup here where I can just move this up and down like so. And you could use this to kind of generate thumbnails when you save this USD data out. So we'll talk about that more later. I'm not actually going to generate thumbnails, but I'm going to use this camera to render from later on. When I'm happy, I would publish this and it would become a USD asset on disk. And that's fine. I can then switch to a asset reference, which is just basically channel referencing the output of this. So my USD data would go to job assets, op name, which the op name expression is just grabbing this, and then USD. So to keep it really simple, again, in my project structure, in the monsters project, in my assets department, monsters, it's there. So it's just the monster. So I've not published, you've not seen me publish this yet, but if this didn't exist, then that's where it would go. So I wonder if I could flush this out, because Houdini can block files sometimes. So I could, yeah, it won't let me. But I could version up and you'd get another version, or I could save over. So I'm not going to publish it. I'm going to keep it live for now and just let this feed through. So 0, it's going to read through. And that's pretty much what we're going to talk about next is the, this node here is a set variant node, and it's riddled with a couple of custom attributes, which are, we're going to talk about later on. It's not actually in use at the moment. It become more apparent when we have more kind of geometry variants and material variants. But what these attributes are referring to are further down the line. I set up a TOPS network to create wedges for things like HDRI maps, material variants, and geometry variants. And I can automatically render everything based on this little configuration. I can just hit go overnight and I'll get a set of folders running. So we'll go through this when the time comes, but just in case you see that, don't worry too much about it. So when you publish a USD and you read from the cached, your cameras disappear. So I just grabbed the camera again and I graphed it back in. So nothing changes here. Okay. And then I'm going to do this thing where I spin the asset, which is basically, it's an expression I wrote to take a couple of parameters down here. There it is. There's the attributes. And it's just going to spin the asset. So if I just shift R to stop it from rendering, it's going to spin the asset from the start, and for half, it's going to take the full length of frame range and divide it by 2, and it's going to spin him for half of that, and that's it. And then I'm going to add a floor in like so, and then I'm just going to make sure the floor always sits underneath the asset. That way, if I'm kind of bringing in models of a different size, when I'm shifting it around a bit, it's just going to sit where it needs to be, just for a presentation. Then I'm bringing the old ref bowls, constraining them to the camera, so that again the same thing. If I move him, my ref bowls don't move. And then I'm adding a string of lights, and I'm grafting the lights in here. So what happens when you drop a light down is, now in Solaris you get like these primitive paths and a $OS, and it's just basically naming the light in your hierarchy like so. So if I look at these lights here, you'll see I've got these lights, and that's fine, and it means I don't have to worry too much about them. I can just label them here and they'll get labeled in here. So that's because it's called $OS. I'm also going to label my lights with a LPE tag so I can identify that later on in rendering and compositing, and they all have this, so I can kind of just refer to them in an AOV pass later on. So we'll show that in action, and I'll swing back round and hyper focus on things as we need them. The null is actually a light with no intensity and no scale in the viewport, and it's set to not show in the viewport. And this is so that if I want complete darkness, let me see if I can do this. If I just graph the lights in and I now start looking at my render camera, now we still don't have any render settings, they're happening here, so we're still rendering from this global environment right now. But what's going to happen is he's going to spin around, and then the light rig is going to also spin around as well. So it's kind of a nice way, and you can see the ref ball showing the environment of my my garden that desperately needs some attention. I should go out and garden rather than do Houdini. So that's pretty much it, and then we're going to just hit render, and you'll see that we get the environment lighting kicking in as well. And you may notice it feels like there's blurring and stuff like that on there, and depth of field. There probably is. If you hit D on here, you may need to disable the motion blur and disable the depth of field just temporarily and save as default, because these are kind of like settings that are being used right now via the viewport. So what we're going to do is drop in this background plate. Oh yes, also you may have noticed an additional ground plate here as well. So that is basically a piece of geometry, just a disk geometry here. I use a backdrop or a disk, and I'm projecting the HDRI, and this, by the way, is kind of borrowed from a sidefx tutorial, and it's projection, so it's going to project the HDRI back onto the grid, so it kind of just gets a similar bounce lighting as well. And that map that's been brought in is referred to here. It's not a disk path, it's called @HDRI, and that's a variable that's been sent out and pulled in my tops graph. So I'm basically making a list of HDRIs under this variable, and then I can circle through them at some point. So what I can do is look back through the camera, and now look through the backplate and the render settings, and now I can start to always look at the render settings and tell Karma that I'm actually going to be looking now at my render settings. So you'll start to see a little bit of the background plate is basically loading in the HDRI map. So by default, the background plate will come in looking like the HDRI map, which is a latitude longitude thing, so it'll look all weird like that. So I've just temporarily scaled it because I haven't got my backplate handy at the moment. So I've just scaled it up, and it's sending out a shadow pass and reflection pass or whatever we need temporarily. Just, well, these will go into the render. It's sending them out into the AOVs, which will be contributed from this and joining these AOVs, which will be inside of here, like so. So you'll get these pulled out reflection. Not that grass is reflective, but you can turn that off. I sometimes use it as a way of just keying out the grass and masking the reflections in. You can do all sorts of things when it comes to shot lighting as well, where you can produce bump maps from projections and stuff. But this is just a look dev setup. Got reflection occlusion and things like that. So you get this. So I've got my crypto mats, my utils, and my comp all going into separate AOVs, but it's going into one render. Sometimes I have separate like thing for crypto and utils and one for beauty, but for simplicity, I'm just going to chuck all these into one EXR file, and they're just going to get saved onto disk. So all my renders go to $job ren asset Houdini. So I render to, if I go back to the monsters job, all my renders go here. So it's kind of like at the top level, and they're either asset based or shot based. And there's one called delivery, which is coming from Resolve when I ever have something to deliver, which we'll talk about maybe in another tutorial. So my asset renders would go to Houdini, and then the kind of structure of the folder would be automatically named like monsters a underscore pink 01 or whatever it was called. So I kind of get this automation thing. So you've got a little bit of a template here to start playing with. We've only got one monster at the moment, so it's not really going to do a great deal. And then I'm not going to have motion blur switched on. I'm just going to bypass that for now. And then what I do is I put this into a switch node, and I use a render settings node, and I just have a couple of predefined settings. One is just a copy of the normal render settings, disabled motion blur, and it's just set to half the resolution, and that's it. And then the other one is, I've called it previs, but I'm like removing stuff and trying to get a really quick render out just to test stuff as well. And that's exactly the same, but it's, you know, a lot smaller resolution. So I can basically drop between these. So I can kind of drop down to my low one, and it'll go a bit mushy because it'll go half the resolution, but Houdini will still show. Oops, I accidentally moved the camera. You can see he's spinning around like so, and then the camera is spinning around. Sorry, the light rig is spinning around. And then if I press Shift R again now, this frame range, I can define the timeline frame range by just setting it here. This works if I'm viewing it and if this is on. So if this is on, if you've got any kind of configure layer setting the frames, the time start and end, it will update. So if I set this to like 500, the timeline updates. So it's quite a nice way of doing it. And my system where it spins around, as I mentioned earlier, also kind of updates. So it's just a thing that you don't have to worry about anymore, right? So you've got one nice render that can work. So in order to render this, you could just hit render, and even though we've got some variables being used, and I'm going to just quickly show you the variables. We've got the variable here that's going to present two maps and two wedges, and we've got material variant, which I'm going to wedge once, but we could wedge 3 times and it's going to pick these 3, which we know we've got. And then we've got 3, we've only got one model at the moment, so we're going to just wedge once. So it's 2 for this and then 3. So this is like the little control center for like gathering all your data that we are going to mass produce later on when we kind of add more materials and add more creatures and make one big USD structure here. So yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, when we're lighting very quickly, if you want to just like test things, if you turn the lights off, everything switches off. But it's because if you turn all the lights off normally, Houdini creates a headlight as though someone's just shining a headlight directly onto the geometry. So this is what this is for. So I can kind of switch on the sunlight and see only the sunlight working if ever I actually set this up properly. I don't know actually where it even is, this sunlight. Oh, there he is. Took a while to kick in. So sometimes I'll just kind of put in the sunlight. So I'm very loosely crossing over the look dev territory here, which is, there's a little bit more to it than this in terms of this background HDRI has been shot on my, was it the 360 camera, Insta-X or whatever it's called. And I'll put a video in how I did all that as well, if you're interested in that. And then it's brought into Nuke and it's just kind of balanced. It's the colors being normalized towards a Macbeth color chart, then it's converted to Ace's color space. So that's my HDRI, but the other ones I'm pulling in later on, I don't know if they just come off the internet. One's come from sidefx as well, so it's coming from the built-in sidefx, but it's good enough to get some lighting in your scene and to show off your model at this stage, I think. So that's kind of what we're going to do. So if we look at the tops graph, I don't think we really need to run the tops graph at the moment, because even if it's not run, the variables set out will just be like the defaults. So that means that the variables that are being used in at Geo, at Mat, and switch lights, that could be wrong. I think that might be a bit wrong. I might just remove that part. That was from an old setup. They're going to get named like Monster A Pink 01, and it's just using those. So we could render this to disk and you'd see that, but I'm not going to render anything until we've done another model or another material variant and stuff like that. So if we just render the XPU and we switch our light back on, I'm only using one environment map. I'm not even using the sun in this case because it's giving enough interest, isn't it? So I have this template that I can kind of jig around a little bit. And then when it comes to what's going off here, I've got the materials being assigned. And just to show you, maybe I could just Shift R, and then maybe we could, maybe down here, we'll clip just the skin. So I'm going to clip the skin. And what's happening really is if I go back into SOPs in here, press U to hide this. If we were to clip just the skin, you can see what we've built here. So we've got like this kind of setup here. So the skin color and the purple, the light purple, is one geometry, and then there's a little bit of a gap, and then there's something underneath, which I think will be quite interesting for later on if we need to do anything with it and stuff. But we'll see. We'll it's a placeholder, and we're gonna do some explosions and stuff and whatever, make him tear apart or something. I'm gonna leave that on and just render it. It might look cool. So you can see it's come through in the proxy as well, which is really, really cool. So if we go and make sure we're looking down here, and we go to our render settings and we fire off Karma XPU, you can kind of review both. And we're still looking at the quality at half res as well. So if we wanted to now render this to disk, then I would basically, just for this one, what I could do is I could just render here, and I'll just render to disk. I'll just render a frame range, render to disk, and see if it works. So that's going to render, and I have got MPlay monitor switched on. So in this little tab here, it will allow MPlay to be loaded, and as your images are rendered, it will show them to you, and then it'll save them to disk. So once that gets saved, it will save this to disk, and it will go in renders, assets. This is by the way, you don't have to do any of this, it's just the way I'm working, but it's going to go in here, Monster A, like so. And it's going to do that kind of spinny thing. Obviously, we wouldn't have the inside, but it's a good way of showing maybe somebody what is actually textured on the inside as well. And you get all of the passes. So you get like the albedo. The albedo looks weird because I think there's a, I think it's the glossy pass. You can have gloss color, and I think that is classed as albedo. But you get like the crypto materials, and then you get the crypto primitives as well. So if you wanted to do a bit of, and you get UVs with anti-aliasing, that's a custom one. Depth with no anti-aliasing, it's a custom one. The holdout diffuse doesn't really do anything. Reflection occlusion, reflection shadows, so that you could use these in a compositor and coat. You're getting some grossness in there, and you get all the things. I don't need emission, glossy reflections. We don't need volume, so we could, based on this project, remove those AOVs just to make it easier for us. So you get all these, like, and we don't need indirect volume because I've just set up a template subsurface, so you can kind of see the weirdness there as well, and an ambient occlusion pass. So yeah, and it's quite quick. I'm not going to let it's a very small resolution as well because of the settings, but it just proves that you can test it working. And now this template's in place, and we can kind of go through it and start adding more material variants and more geometry variants to it, and then finally produce one USD that we can just render or even give to CFX. So the plan is, in the next video, we'll add some more material variants, and it'll be really quick and easy, I think. And we'll look at the rendering setup for that, and we'll look at maybe rendering adding another model, adding another creature and rendering that. Then finally we'll pick one of them and we'll drop it in CFX, so we get a posed version that we can switch on and off as well and do something interesting with that. Okay, so the first render of the first geometry variant and the material variant is done under the light environment. So I just chose to spin the asset in the lights really quickly to get a quick pass. And I've dumped the AOVs here as well, so you can see we've got the crypto mats, crypto primitives, and all the usual AOVs to kind of rebuilding the beauty. And also I've got these holdouts like the reflection and reflection occlusion and shadows and whatnot, all coming from the background plate. So I've chose to render this on a black background, like so, with the color. So what we're going to do next, out on disk as well, these have gone to my renders location here. So it's been named Monster A Pink 01 and then the name of the HDRI. So I can kind of just quickly look and kind of go, oh yeah, that's my garden. And the go inside and its version and then just beauty, like so. So what I chose to do is render multiple light rigs in one go. So you can see I've got Monster A here, and also you might see a Monster B where I've jumped forward and I've added a second monster, which we're going to do together. If you're finding this tutorial useful, why not drop a like and let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in learning more Houdini, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next tutorial.